Dawn leaks softly through the narrow windows of a Greek workshop, not yet loud with noise, but already warm with the breath of charcoal. In many cities, the first light finds a line of metal joined to metal, as if the day itself were a slow, careful project starting from a single rivet. The smell is distinct, a blend of charcoal, oil, and something resinous that clings to leather and wood. It is not the grand scent of a temple or the sharp tang of newly cut stone, but a steady, ordinary odor that says, today there will be work. There will be heat, there will be repetition, and there will be small, unremarkable triumphs. The day begins with a forge that is as much a place of routine as it is a forge of metal dot. In ancient Greek thought, Hephaestus stands as the god who makes things work. He is the smith of the gods, a creator who does not shout, but shapes, locks, and joins. He is not a hero in the dramatic sense, but a patient craftsman with a hammer that rings out in measured, reliable rhythms. His legends tell of a workshop set on volcanic Lemnos, a place where the air is thick with mineral scent and the heat never quite seems to leave the bones. In those stories, Hephaestus labors for the sake of the divine order, weapons for the Yah, gods' intricate devices, and statues animated by hidden craft. The myths are not instructive manuals for daily life, but they frame the artisan's world as one of steady purpose, quiet repetition, and careful control of flame and metal. The idea of a divine forger gives shape to a human practice that is, in truth, much more mundane and deeply human. The smith in the workshop who tends the fire, measures the metal, and keeps the hours with a precise sense of duty to understand. The ordinary workshop, one starts with the forge itself, the heart of the space. The charcoal bed is a slow, living thing, shifting in color from dull red to bright orange as air and fuel mingle with the metal. The bellows, worn smooth by countless hands, push a steady stream of air into the blaze. The master, who bears the responsibility for the day's work, presides over the furnace with the calm authority that comes from years of practice. He knows the feel of metal at different temperatures, as surely as a musician knows the scale of a familiar instrument. When bronze or iron lies in the heat, it remembers that it will change shape under the hammer, that its surface will accept the mark of the tool and the memory of the builder's hand. The tools are the sewls, workshop's everyday vocabulary. An anvil, broad and stubborn, holds fast as the smith breathes a moment, and then speaks to the metal with hammer blows that fall in a careful sequence. A hammer, with its weight and balance, is a companion two parts of a single conversation echoing back from the stubborn steel. Tongs, long and lean, reach into the furnace's glow to cradle a red, pliable form and guide it to the anvils. Patient face. Files and rasps lie within reach, the rough edges ready to trim away, the minute imperfections that only become obvious after the metal cools and the light shifts. There are scrapers and chisels, a few small wooden pegs, and squares of leather to wrap around edges that must not scratch or bite into the skin of a hand working at speed. Every tool has a place, and every place has a purpose, even as the day might bring a new task that requires a short rearrangement and a quick, practiced decision. Metal itself is the workshop's partner in daily life. Bronze, an alloy of copper, and tin holds a brightness that is warm but not blinding, a surface that gleams without stealing the eye. Iron, sturdier and less forgiving, demands a patient temperament and a careful hand. The smith begins with rough ingots or scrap, paying mind to the alloy's traceable history, where it came from, what other metals might be present, and what future purpose the heated form will serve. The day's work might start with simple, repetitive tasks, flattening a sheet of bronze for a buckle, bending a rod into a frame, or smoothing the edge of a blade until it gleams with a uniform tone. There is a quiet satisfaction in those small acts, the way a rough edge yields to the patient pressure of a file, the way a curve finds its own natural plan under the pressure of a guiding hammer dot in a typical workshop. The social structure is visible even in its silence. An apprentice, eager and watchful, sits at the edge of the room, hands resting on knees, eyes learning the way heat governs metal. The master's voice is rarely loud, but it carries with it the weight of instruction, the patient correction of emotion, the reminder to keep the forge clean, the insistence on measuring twice before cutting once. The apprentice learns to observe not only the metal, but the environment, the rhythm of the day, the changes in temperature from dawn to late afternoon, the way light falls across the bench as the sun climbs higher. There is a careful economy. To the workshop life, the cost of fuel weighed against the value of a finished tool, the time allotted to a project balanced against the patience to refine and recast when necessary got, of course. The workshop is not only an instrument of utility, it is a site of culture and memory. The items produce the hinges that hold doors shut in temple treasuries, the nails that fasten boat timbers, the pins that join the bronze handles of sacred vessels, carry a trace of the community that ordered their use. The smith's craft is intertwined with civic life. Ships require anchors. Temples require statuary. Households require tools, each object a link in the chain of daily routines that keep a polis going. There is ritual, too, in the form of offerings and prayers that pair with work as part of a larger economy of belief. A small shrine may sit near the doorway of a workshop, bearing votive figurines to Hephaestus and to his divine helpers. The sense is not that the smith is performing a mere craft, but that he participates in a broader, slower ceremony, the hum of daily labor that makes possible the more visible hopes of the city. What the myths offer, then, is not a dramatic blueprint for every day, but a frame for understanding the ordinary's importance. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, embodies the virtue of steady, patient work. The human smith, in turn, embodies the same virtue, assembling, adjusting, testing, reworking with the added weight of measurement, safety, and the unpredictable demands of the day's orders. The workshop is, in truth, a crossroads of intention, of skill and patience, of tradition and adaptation, of a private rhythm that must fit into the calendar of civic life. The gods may look down with a kind of amused pride at a well-formed hinge or a tool that holds its edge. But the real drama lies in the small, persistent choices a smith makes as the fire glows through the morning, then again as the sun slides. Toward evening, and the last scraps are stowed away in the quiet hours before the first. Outside noise intrudes the street trader's calls, the distant clatter of chariots returning to the forum. The workshop's silence has a shape. It is a silence defined by repetition, the never-ending sequence of heating, hammering, cooling, and testing. It is a silence that gives room to thought, the smell of metal memories, the sense of time measured not in hours, but in the oval rhythm of a sequence that starts anew with each flame. The ordinary inner life of the smith, the careful placement of a finger to steady a blade, the slow counting of strokes to avoid overworking a joint, a habit of wiping the sweat from the brow with the back of a leather glove. These are the small, almost invisible acts that make up a life. The day's end gathers around the cooling metal, as if the world itself exhales after a long, careful breath. The shop settles into a gentle mess of tools and scraps, the air growing cooler, the day slipping toward the soft edges of dusk. One might wonder what counts as a legacy in such a place. The god Hephaestus presents the idea of an enduring craft, a lineage of making that travels from one generation to the next through apprenticeship and the shared knowledge of technique. The human smith, in his ordinary workshop, preserves a tradition that is not glamorous, not filled with the dramatic suspense of mythic battles, but essential in its own understated way. These are the days when a city is kept running by the routine of metal, the everyday memory of how a door is hung, how a ship is fastened to its anchor, how a temple's bronze fittings catch the light just so at the hour when the sun meets the stone. The abundance of small, practical successes makes possible larger ambitions, the grander statues, the larger doors, the sturdier ships, the modest foundation on which the polis leans. And yet, as the forge cools and the tools rest in their places, a question remains, quiet and easy to overlook in the glow of a settled day. In a culture that venerates the grand, what is the worth of the ordinary? If the god's workshop thrives on the spectacle of invention and the spectacle of war, what is the value of the daily grind, the unamplified, repetitive labor that makes it possible for everything else to exist? The answer, perhaps, lies not in immediate, dramatic results, but in a slower kind of durability, the ability to make something that endures, not only in metal, but in memory. A hinge that will last across years, a blade that preserves its edge, a joint that holds fast through countless uses. In that sense, the ordinary workshop is not a mere footnote to mythical grandeur. It is a steady thread through which a city learns to endure. The morning continues, but the tempo of the day shifts from the initial glow to a steady, considered patience. If Section 1 invited you to stand at the forge door and listen to the quiet breathing of a workshop, Section 2 invites you to move closer, to watch the work unfold in layers, from the first heat to the final polish, from a general plan to the fine decisions that arrive with each task dot in a Greek workshop. The day often begins long after the sun has licked the horizon of the carpenter's benches, and the street stalls have begun to cough into life. The master, having surveyed the inventory of metal and fuel, receives the day's orders through a practiced, almost ceremonial routine. An apprentice lays out the day's work on the bench, an array of metal blanks, a half-finished hinge, a handful of handles, a couple of intricate pins. The master's eye reads the list not as a schedule, but as a map of possible problems. Which pieces will require the most accurate shaping? Which joints will demand the gentlest touch to avoid work hardening the metal? Which projects will benefit from a patient anneal to relieve internal stress? The order's dignity lies in the attention given to small problems ahead of time, the way a slight misalignment at the start will echo through the entire piece, if not checked dot to understand the craft. One must recognize the two broad paths metalworkers walked in the ancient world, casting and forming. Casting, in its simplest sense, is the art of shaping metal by pouring it into a mold and letting it cool into a given form. This was least common for complex structures in bronze and iron, but it was essential for certain application statues, certain decorative elements, and a range of fittings that required a mass-produced uniformity. The lost wax technique, known from later Greek and Hellenistic practice, shows up in myth and memory as a symbol of refinement. The idea that even grand things could emerge from a small, delicate seed of wax and a careful investment of metal. In ordinary workshop life, casting is a specialized skill reserved for larger components or objects that would be difficult to hammer into shape. Forming, by contrast, is the day-to-day bread of the smith, heating the metal until it becomes malleable, and then shaping it with hammer, file, and drill. This is where the workshop reveals its quiet genius, the ability to coax a rough ingot into a precise hinge, a smooth blade, a sturdy rivet. The hammer's voice is not loud but persistent, a cadence that matches the breath of the forge. The smith learns to listen for the metal's mood through sound and temperature. When bronze yields with a soft give, when iron offers resistance that demands more heat and fewer blows, when a sheet of metal begins to glow with a uniform gold red. When pulled just the right distance across the anvil, temperature is a language in itself. The color of the metal tells a story. A dull red awakens a promise. A bright orange speaks of readiness. A pale yellow hints that the surface is ripe for the next stage. The forger must read these signs with patience. Overheating can ruin a piece by making it brittle. Underheating can leave it stubborn and difficult to shape. The craftsman's eye, trained by years of practice, becomes the most reliable instrument in the room. The apprentice learns not from a single rule, but from repeated, careful observation, how the same alloy behaves differently when the air is drier, when the room is cooler, when a portion of the forge floor is damp from a recent rain. The everyday tools carry their own stories. The anvil stands in the middle of the room, a stubborn, almost obstinate friend that bears the brunt of every decision. Its surface is scored with the marks of 1,000 blows. Each dent is a memory of a moment, when the metal yielded to a plan that did not quite go as intended. The hammer, with its weight and balance, is the voice of the hand, the extension of a craftsman's will into the stubborn metal. Tongs, long and sturdy, arrive with the calm of a tried partner, guiding hot material from flame to anvil to the next stage without burning fingers or misplacing a piece. Files and rasps lie in a small order, ready to translate a rough shape into something refined, to turn a blemished surface into a calm, even glow that catches the light in a just right way. The chisels, the punches, the little wooden pegs used to align parts during assembly, their presence is a testament to how many tiny decisions go into a single, finished item. Behind the tangible tools is a geography of supply. Bronze, a familiar alloy of copper and tin, is the common language of the workshop. Its properties: a warm glow, a sheen that holds under oil, a forgiveness for patient work, make it suited to vessels, fittings, and ceremonial objects alike. Iron, tougher and heavier, requires more heat and a cooler temper from the craftsman's hand, but it offers a practical durability that Greek households and ships both valued. The tin in bronze often traces its own far-off supply routes. Tin might arrive by sea from far trading networks that threaded through the Aegean and into the Black Sea. Copper could come from Cyprus or local Balkan sources. And occasionally, iron would arrive as recycled material, pieces melted down and reformed into something with a new life and shape. The apprentice learns to see the metal not as a simple material, but as a participant in a long chain of exchange, its journey from mine to workshop to home. temple or ship dock in such a workshop, the social fabric matters as much as the metal. The master's voice, when it rises, carries the gravity of responsibility, an instruction that is equal parts correction and encouragement. The apprentice's gaze, fixed to the task, grows steadier with each passing week. The rest of the room hums with the quieter sounds of a small community. A fellow worker calling out a tip about a faster way to trim a rough edge. A crate of oil and resin being wheeled in for lubrication and protection against rust. A small, wooden crate of leather scraps used to cushion delicate joints. The rhythm is not merely mechanical. It is a form of social etiquette, a series of unspoken agreements about safety, cleanliness, and the care of tools and materials. The master's workshop becomes, in this light, a school of behavior as much as it is a factory of objects. And what of the ritual life surrounding the daily labor? The myths place Hephaestus at the heart of the world where craft and ceremony meet. In a real-world Greek workshop, ritual appears as the respectful handling of sacred or civic needs, molding the handles of a temple vessel to exact specifications for a ritual, aligning a hinge so that a door would open smoothly for the statue. Processions, or producing a blade that would see service in a ceremonial context, even as it served a practical one. A small shrine to Hephaestus might stand near the doorway, not merely for blessing, but as a quiet reminder of the responsibilities these metals carry, the lives they touch, the ships they secure, the tools that enable daily life to continue. The mythic aura lingers, but its influence is largely about a frame of mind, patience, precision, and a faith that even the most ordinary object can be a part of something larger, an order that holds a city together through steady care. Listen closely. The ordinary workshop reveals a parallel between human practice and mythic imagination. The story of a craftsperson who shapes metal is not about grand battles or dramatic fame, but about a patient, enduring practice and accumulation of small improvements, a careful extension of one generation's knowledge into the next. The mastery is not the sudden spark of invention, but the long, unhurried refinement of technique and routine. In that sense, the daily work of the Greek metalworker becomes a mirror for the polis itself, a place where order, discipline, and shared purpose slowly transform raw material into the everyday conveniences that make civil life possible. Yet for all this calm, a question remains, quiet at the edge of the firelight. What sustains a culture's memory of such ordinary acts? When the bright myths are long told, and the temple bells have fallen silent? If the grand images of Hephaestus' forge in divine devices eclipse the humble, enduring acts of shaping, joining, and finishing, how do these smaller achievements persist in the city's memory? Is the legacy of the ordinary workshop remembered? In the sturdiness of a hinge that lasts through centuries, in the smoothness of a blade that can cut through a day's work with a simple, reliable motion, or in the way an apprentice's careful hand becomes a master's longer, more confident hand in turn? As the light outside dims and the forge settles into a patient, even lull, the ordinary workshop offers its final quiet lesson of the day. The heat lingers like a memory in the air, not a blaze, but a remembered warmth, as if the room itself is exhaling after a long, careful task. The master moves softly through the space, not with the drama of a storyteller, but with the certainty of someone who has already taught the same steps many times. He checks the bench where the day's work is gathered like pebbles on a shore, a sacramental handful of hinges, rivets, and polished edges that reflect the glow of the fading coal. The apprentice, too, is winding down in a different rhythm. The hands that were precise and steady now rest, perhaps in a way that a pupil's hands rest after a long lesson, not yet fully relaxed, but tuned to a gentler tempo. In this final hour, the workshop speaks through its ordinary, almost silent inscriptions. There is the smoothness of a newly finished hinge, the even line of a blade that will serve another day with a quiet trust, the neat row of small wooden pegs that held pieces in alignment during assembly and have now been tucked away. Each object is more than its function. It is a report from a series of decisions, a record of a plan executed with patience. The master places one piece beside another, as if laying out the results of a conversation, metal speaking to metal, form listening to function, a dialogue that unfolds over days and weeks rather than moments. The tools return to their places with a habitual, almost reverent carefulness. The hammer rests in its cradle. The tongs lie aligned with the iron of the anvil. A file's teeth shine with the dust of many passes. Behind the tangible outcomes, however, lies the workshop's deeper, slower achievement, the transmission of approach. The apprentice learns not only how to strike with a certain force, or how to judge temperature by color, but how to pause before a decision, how to breathe with the metal as it cools, how to adjust a plan midstream when a flaw reveals itself. It is a discipline of restraint as much as skill, a discipline that serves a city's daily needs without calling attention to itself. The master's quiet voice, when it rises, carries the gravity of responsibility, to safeguard safety, to prevent waste, to respect the metal's history from ore to finished object, to honor the ritual of craft that links workshop to temple, shipyard to home. The day's everyday rituals take on ceremonial hues when viewed from a certain distance. The oil that keeps iron from grinding to dust, the resin that keeps wood from cracking, the leather that wraps a corner so a cut does not confess itself in the next user's hand. These are not mere supplies, but the quiet guardians of longevity. The apprentice learns to treat them with care, to measure oil with a careful eye, to polish bronze until its surface holds a small, patient glow that does not dazzle, but invites touch. The workshop thus becomes a school of stewardship of materials, of shared space, of communal memory. It is a place where a decision made above the anvil, whether to adjust a plan or to abandon a flawed approach, has a ripple effect on 100 other tasks that rely on a steady, trustworthy baseline. In the myths, Hephaestus is the divine craftsman who can turn chaos into order with a mere touch of metal and flame. In ordinary life, the Greek metal worker embodies a humbler yet equally potent craft to create reliable things, day after day, with a discipline that never pretends to be glamorous, but always promises usefulness. The workshop is not a theater of grand gestures, but a repository of small, durable acts. A hinge that does not creak, a blade that remains true, a joint that keeps a door from warping in the heat of the sun or the pressure of a sailor's hand during a voyage. These are not the flashy marks of success in a hero's saga. They are the quiet confirmations that a city can endure when its days run steady, its needs are predictable, and its people know where to find the tools that make life possible. What, then, is the lasting inheritance of such ordinary practice? It is not merely the metal objects that survive centuries, though. Those are visible reminders. The more persistent legacy lies in habits, the discipline of observation, the habit of double-checking one's work, the discipline of learning to pause before proceeding, the habit of sharing knowledge with a younger apprentice, who, in turn, will carry the same practices into the next generation. The workshop's memory travels in the minds of those who learn to measure twice and strike once, who learn to save a scrap for a future project rather than waste it, who learn to respect the temper of metal and the temper of a crew who must work together under a shared roof. In these ways, the ordinary forger becomes a quiet custodian of a culture's stability, a facilitator of continuity, a guardian of the day's small essential victories, and the city the polis benefits in ways that are easy to overlook. A single ship's anchor, a temple door's hinge, a household's everyday tools, all of these require metal and the skilled hands to shape it. In this regard, the workshop helps to maintain a social contract, unspoken agreement that the city's ordinary routines will be supported by reliable craft. The ships that travel for trade, the temples that host rites and processions, the doors that swing to let people in and out with ease, all these depend on the quiet competence of the workshop. The gods may smile upon feats of invention and grand construction, yet the sustainability of a city rests on the offhand, unglamorous competence of those who shape, join, smooth, and finish. The question that lingers after such a day is not a dramatic capitulation, but a gentle invitation for reflection. How did these ordinary practices, repeated across countless days, sustain the memory and the viability of a civilization? If the myths present the gods as pattern makers who set the world spinning, what patterns did ordinary craftsmen create that outlived their own lifetimes? The hinges, the rivets, the tools restowed at the end of a shift, all of them became a quiet infrastructure of daily life that could outlast a season of drought, a campaign, or the loss of a master's eye dot in the end, the story of the ordinary. Greek metalworker is a story of steady resilience. It is a narrative of a city kept erect not by spectacular feats, but by the patient, consistent labor that makes possible the grander statements, the heroic sculptures on a temple, the ships that reach distant shores, the social rituals that bind a people together. The divine and the human meet not in a blaze of glory, but in the consistent, careful work that keeps the world moving with a calm, predictable rhythm. The hammer may not sing a thrilling tune, and the forge may not burn with a dramatic flame, but the steel and bronze carry a memory of hands that learn to listen to heat, to measure by color, to trust the feel of metal under a steady, patient pressure dot. So we end where we began, not with a revelation, but with a sigh of recognition. The ordinary has its own quiet sovereignty. The workshop's days are neither brief nor spectacular. They are long and repeatable, and in their repetition lies an enduring value. The city depends on such maintenance to hold itself together through time, to welcome each new generation with the tools of continuity in their hands. As the smoke settles and the tools rest in their places, you might wonder how many of today's belts, hinges, or quick fixes in your own world began as patient, uncelebrated decisions in a Greek workshop long ago. The memory lives in the practiced. Hands and the shared routines that, once learned, travel forward across centuries, shaping not only objects, but the very rhythms of daily life. Dawn along the Nile arrives not with a trumpet, but with a soft glow that slides over water and reed. If you stand on the riverbank and listen, you hear a quiet, everyday chorus, the splash of a boat's oar, the distant murmur of a pottery wheel, the low murmur of neighbors swapping small talk as they begin the day's work. The river itself is not merely a boundary or a boundary line. It is a steady, patient companion that dictates warmth and season, a clock that ticks with a rhythm, as predictable as the sun. To understand daily life in ancient Egypt is to begin with the Nile's rhythm, the pulse of flood, recession and return, the seasonal march that frames every waking hour dot in the villages and towns along the banks. Life centers around the fields, and the river, and the family is the first unit of time. A household usually gathers on a dirt floor or a bare chestnut of a courtyard, the day's chores distributed with quiet familiarity. The bread, seasoned with salt and sometimes a little honey, is not merely nourishment, but a ritual of routine, a quiet, almost ceremonial start to the day that is as reliable as the sunrise. The bread is baked in clay ovens, perhaps in a kitchen shared with other households, where the dough is worked with hands that know the weight of the grains and the feel of the flour's grain. The barley and wheat that fill the granaries come from the Nile's generous gifts, the yearly promise that one season's abundance can become the next season's resilience. Everything grain, oil, beer, fish, vegetables passes through a domestic economy that is at once simple and deeply organized. If you walk through a village, you will notice the houses themselves tell a story of adaptation to the climate. They are built from sun-dried mud bricks, their walls thick and cool, their doors small and sturdy. The rooms are arranged around a central courtyard that admits light and shade in the right places. Inside, the furniture is spare and functional. Low stools, simple beds on rope supports, shelves holding bowls and cups, a loom pressed into a corner for weaving linen and flax. The walls might be plastered with a pale, cool finish sometimes, painted with scenes or simple geometric patterns that speak more of daily life than of divine drama. The spaces are designed to keep heat at bay while letting you hear the river's breath just beyond the wall. Life along the Nile is a rhythm of work and rest that shifts with the seasons. In the flood season of Akhet, when the river rises and spreads over the land, fields lie under water, waiting for the silt to settle and soil to settle into fertile promise. It is a time of waiting, of preparation, when boats move slowly along the channels, carrying reed mats, sacks of grain, tools, and the seeds that will be planted as soon as the waters recede. In Tere, when the waters withdraw and the land emerges, the work becomes more visible, planting seeds in furrows, guiding oxen along the fields, turning the soil with simple plows, and tending young shoots that will grow into a harvest. In Shemu, the harvest months of late summer, the work becomes a careful procession of gathering, threshing, and storing. The grain is separated from chaff in quiet, repetitive motions, the millstone turning with a patient grind, the grain poured into jars or granaries, a routine that looks almost like a practiced dance as laborers move with predictable, unhurried steps. The people who live along the Nile are not only farmers. They are makers of everyday things that form the backbone of function and comfort. Potters shape bowls and jars from clay with hands that have learned the feel of the material, the way the clay yields under pressure, the way a wheel's rotation finds a gentle, even rhythm. Weavers turn flax and later linen into textiles that catch the sun with a soft sheen and a cool touch, fabrics that are woven in long, patient strips. Weavers' looms stand in rooms with open roofs, catching the breeze to keep the threads from sticking together. A quiet art that produces color in the simplest forms earth, tones from the loom and the river's own palette of blues and greens. The smiths and metalworkers, the people who bend copper or bronze into fittings for jars and tools for farming, work in workshops that smell of oil, resin, and smoke. The tools they use are unassuming but essential. Knives for trimming, calipers for measurement, chisels for finishing, and scraping tools that leave a surface smooth enough to gather a traveler's eye and a craftsman's pride. Trade and daily. Exchange connect villages along the Nile to larger networks, though the rhythm here remains intimate and local. A boatman may carry jars of oil and beer, pottery bowls, and dried fish from one village to the next. A farmer might trade a season's surplus for rope, fabric, or a new tool. The roads are not broad avenues, but dusty paths that wind between fields and courtyards, and along these paths you can hear the language of economy, lists, rents, and accounts spoken in a measured, careful voice. In the temples and in the houses, records and inscriptions, though not as common as in later periods, offer glimpses into a world of management and memory. A clerk in a temple or a local granary records the flow of grain, the balance of stock, the distribution to workers, and the long chain that carries food from water to table and from surplus to relief in lean years. Even private households participate in this careful accounting, setting aside small portions of grain for festivals, for weddings, or for the cycles of ancestor offerings that greet a new year with the same quiet arrangement of duties. The Niles. Daily life is also a story of family and shared routines. A mother may teach a daughter or a son how to wash linen, spin thread, or knead bread dough. Father and older siblings might work the fields and supervise the day's chores, while grandparents share stories that keep memory alive, tales of floods and droughts, of boats that survived storms, of simple tools that stood the test of time. In such households, education is practical. Knowledge passes in the form of tunes learned at the loom, tricks for lifting a heavy basket, or the careful teaching of a child how to measure a jar's capacity. The elders pass along a sense of timing, the hours for offerings in the household shrine, the times for different meals, the seasonal patterns that mark a life that is deeply bound to water, land, and weather. What holds this quiet world together is not the spectacle of grand ceremony, but the steady practice of everyday competence. The bread must bake, the grain must be stored, the irrigation ditches must be kept clear, the roofs must be repaired before the next rain, and the ships must be seaworthy enough to travel to markets far away. A simple household hinges on the trust that the tools and routines will work as expected, an almost invisible trust in the reliability of the mundane, in the ordinary work that keeps daily life from tipping into chaos. The presence of the Nile makes possible a continuity that looks unremarkable to the untrained eye, but proves essential in moments of scarcity and in times of plenty alike. The river's generosity is inseparable from the people's careful planning. Their daily life grows from the same soil that feeds the crops and the same water that shapes their day's dot in the midst of all this quiet routine. The cities larger, structures, the temples, the palaces, the scribal houses. The markets offer a broader frame for the life you see up close on the riverbank. The temple's courtyard is a place where offerings, processions, and small, unseen tasks connect to a greater world of ritual and memory. The scribe's desk, though modest beside a temple wall, holds lists and accounts that help allocate grain, cloth, and tools to communities, artisans, and apprentices. Such records are not scenes of drama, but instruments of order. They translate the river's bounty into predictable resources for people to use, share, and pass on. And so the Nile's daily life breathes in a quiet, patient cadence, A life of work that respects limits and embraces cycles. A life that looks to the river, not for spectacle, but for sustenance, for timing, and for a sense of place. As you slowly lift your gaze from the water and the fields to the horizon of the Nile Valley, you might wonder about the broader currents that shape this world. How did ordinary people interpret the God's signs in the weather and flood? How did a family's routine become a thread in a larger tapestry of temple duties, state administration, and long-distance trade? And what of the quiet work that endures? When dynasties rise and fall, the careful care of a loaf of bread, the precise alignment of a reed mat, the steady craft of a potter turning clay into a bowl that will be used by countless hands. The questions are not meant to halt your breathing, but to give it space, a pause to hold the ordinary in your awareness. The Nile's daily life is not a dramatic chronicle, but a long, patient narrative of people living in harmony with the river. That offers both a home and a necessity. Its true stories lie in the everyday, the sense that hands and routines can shape a landscape, and that a life in which work is valued for its reliability can sustain a society through time. If you carry one image forward from this morning by the river, let it be a simple one. A mother kneading dough in the shade of a mud brick porch. A farmer guiding oxen along a furrow that runs in neat, careful lines. A scribe setting down a list with a quiet, methodical calm. These are the everyday inscriptions of a civilization that endured because its people learned to live with the land and with each other in predictable, patient ways. The Nile's steady rhythm continues to shape life, but Section 2 invites you to move a little closer to the textures of daily work that keep that rhythm steady. If Section 1 painted the scene of a village waking to the river's breath, Section 2 peels back the layers, the crafts that turn clay, flax, and copper into useful things. The people who count and distribute resources. The rituals that keep life legible within a vast, sprawling society. The world is still intimate, still focused on the ordinary, yet it reveals a more complex pattern of interdependence. Home, workshop, temple, and field weaving a single fabric of daily necessity. In villages and towns along the river, workshops hum with quiet, purposeful repetition. The potter's wheel turns with a patient, almost meditative cadence. A man or woman at the wheel learns to read the clay at the touch of the fingers, to sense the moment when the vase or jar will harbor no air bubbles that might cause a crack when dried and fired. The clay's color changes with the heat, not just in mood but in memory, the way a vessel's surface remembers. The path of the wheel and the way the pot's walls will hold the thickness steady, so that no edge betrays a moment's rushed care. A potter's apprentice, bending low beside the wheel, gains a kind of quiet literacy, a language of dampness and dryness, of coil and burn, of glaze and crack. The craftsman's hands learn to coax shape from acceptance, to let a lump of earth become a vessel for water, oil, or grain, with nothing dramatic about the transformation, save the assurance that it will hold together after the river's next rise. Weavers work differently, and yet their labor sits in the same quiet economy of routine. Linen and flax fibers are spun into thread, then woven into cloth large enough to wrap a body for warmth, or to cover a work table where bread rests on a clean reed mat. The loom makes a soft, living music, the creak of the beam, the snap of the shuttle, the gentle whisper of threads sliding through the warp. The loom's rhythm synchronizes with the day's other duties, so that a family can shift from bread to cloth to a basket of fish without disorienting the flow of work. The textures produced are more than material. They're social signals. The color and weight of a robe for a festival, the sturdy cloth for a home's everyday use, the linen that wears thin after many washings, but remains fit for a child's clothes or a worker's tunic. The weaver's shop is often a communal place as well as a private corner. Neighboring families share looms temporarily, exchange tips about thread count and weaving density, and stop to discuss a change in the grain harvest, since each craft is part of a larger cycle. Metal workers, too, contribute to the day's quiet infrastructure. Copper is shaped into fittings for jars and doors, nails for light timber, tools for farming and cooking. The heat remains manageable, kept at a level that makes the copper soft enough to form, yet strong enough to endure constant use. The smith learns to judge the metal by feel and by the color that rises in the heated surface, warm, glowing red that promises malleability, pale orange when the metal begins its final shaping, the bright snap of a piece that has been tempered just right. The routines of a smith's day are not solitary. They are social. Apprentices stand nearby, not yet ready to take full responsibility, but ready to observe the way a master cleans follow-up burrs from an edge, how a joint is prepared for a fit, or how a new tool might make an old problem easier to solve. The social fabric of the workshop, quiet, supportive, and exacting, ensures that one piece's weakness does not undermine many others' usefulness. In the heart of the Nile Valley, the granaries and workshops do not stand apart from the temples and administration. They are integrated, connected by a careful system of records and a shared sense of order. The scribes, the most patient readers of time, hold the day's ledger in front of them and translate the river's bounty into numbers. They count grain by weight and estimate the day's consumption for the village, the temple, the temple's dependent communities, and the soldiers or workers who would travel to distant sites for building projects. The scribes do not merely copy words, they translate an abundance into a plan. A clerk in a granary would know how many bushels or sacks of barley and wheat stood in a particular corner, how many had already been stored in reserve for lean years, how many were available to feed a small festival, how many could be lent as relief to neighbors during drought. The clerk's desks are lined with papyrus rolls, lists, ledgers, and short memoranda, each line a quiet map of the day's obligations. They might measure oil or beer with simple vessels, track the distribution of bread during a festival or a rite, or note the arrival of new stock from a distant market. In a sense, the scribal habit is the civilization's memory bank, a quiet, unglamorous service that keeps the river's generosity from dissolving into chaos. The temple and the sacred calendar are inseparable from everyday life. Temples are not only places of worship, but large, careful managers of resources. They supervise grain stores, steward fields given as offerings, allocate oil and linen for processions, and maintain vessels and tools that ceremony requires. Priests move through rooms that smell of incense and resin, but their daily work is surprisingly practical. They measure, weigh, and record, ensuring that a year's cycles of offerings fit into a larger schedule of rituals that anchor a community's sense of time. Their routines include the quiet acts of maintenance, replacing a reed mat on a festival couch, repainting a wall to keep a shrine's surface faithful to its memory, cleaning the scrolls that carry the temple's long lists. When the temple calendar calls for a rite, it is not just a moment of emotion. It is a coordinated operation involving craftspeople, scribes, priests, musicians, and laborers who move with a practiced ease, born of years of shared rehearsal dot in. This deeper view, daily life in ancient Egypt, is a choreography of small, deliberate acts that build toward a stable society. The family begins the day with bread and work. The workshop follows with its careful shaping of the world's ordinary tools. The granary and scribal office transform abundance into plan. The temple ties it all into a rhythm larger than any single act. The river remains the backbone, the reason the fields lie fertile, the reason communities can endure droughts, the reason trade can cross the desert and bring in copper, tin, pigments, and linen. Yet even as the Nile's bounty makes these lives plausible, it is the quiet habits, the practice of approach, the discipline of measurement, the ritual of offering that convert the river's generosity into a lasting order dot. And so the day's quiet undertow continues. The bread cools on a shelf. The loom rests on its frame. A pot dries in the sun. A scale is wiped clean. A list is copied onto fresh parchment or papyrus. The town's stability does not arrive with a trumpet blast. It accrues through repetition. The same checks and balances, the same careful alignments, the same patient attention to detail. These accumulate into a civilization that can weather a flood, a famine, or a changing court. The ordinary life of the Nile Valley is, in its way, heroic in its restraint. Its triumph is not a single act of conquest, but a long sequence of small, reliable decisions so routine that they become invisible, so enduring that they seem almost part of the country's landscape. If you stand again by the river's edge and listen to its evening sigh, you might hear a new question form, the sort of question that does not demand a dramatic answer, but anticipates a slow answer. How did this quiet system, built on daily competence and careful record-keeping, inspire later generations to think about time, memory, and governance? In what ways did the routine, the craft, and the temple's numerical mind become a language? For future societies that would face very different challenges, yet need something durable to lean on, the Nile's daily life teaches that civilization is a long sequence of unremarkable hours. And in those hours, a culture learns to endure as the sun lowers its light and the river's surface mirrors the day's last warmth. The Nile's ordinary life settles into a soft, patient calm. The family's bread sits cooling on a clay shelf. The loom's fibers rest in a reed mat. The pot dries in the sun. The papyrus rolls, and ledgers wait their turn for revision or reference. A village may be modest in scale, but its days are abundant. In routine, 1,000 tiny acts of care that, like the river, keep returning to the same banks and the same rhythms. The craftsman's hands, whether turning clay on a wheel, weaving linen on a loom, shaping copper into a fitting, or carving a bone needle for stitchwork, leaves small marks on the world. A shape, a joint, a thread count that will endure longer than one lifetime. The temple calendar continues to pulse in the background, a patient metronome that marks the seasons and the offerings. The scribe's lists fold and refold as new stock arrives and old stock is measured for distribution. The granaries fill and empty in their own time, and the farmers prepare the fields for another flood cycle, another harvest. If one thread could be chosen to symbolize this life, it would be the thread of memory of what must be stored, how long to keep a tool, when to replace a reed mat, which oil to apply, and how to count out grain fairly. The memory is not glamorous, but it is true. It is the memory that lets a community pause, assess, and plan for a future that might bear no resemblance to today's needs, but will still demand the same quiet attention to detail. In the quiet of the Nile's ordinary life, you glimpse a history that moves, not with dramatic actions, but with patient, methodical habit. The people learn to arrange time and resources so that a festival can rise from a harvest, a temple can be rebuilt with the same care that a household rebuilt its storage. A boat can travel a market without delay. The world's long arc, often framed as dynasties and emperors, rests on the shoulders of daily tasks, repeated across generations. The measurement of grain, the release of oil, the weaving of cloth, the mending of nets, the repair of pottery shards, the substitution of a reed mat that has worn thin. To look at ordinary life is to glimpse the architecture of a civilization that endures because it has set up a set of habits that keep the river's flow steady. If you take away one image from today, let it be the loom in a sunlit room, where threads slide through the warp with a rhythm that matches the river's own patient tempo. The loom is more than a machine. It is a memory container, a place where a family learns to see the world in threads and counts. It holds not just cloth, but the practice of foresight and patience, the capacity to imagine a future in which the next weave might become a cloak, a sail, or a simple garment that carries a child from the home to the market. The scribes read. Pen might trace a line in papyrus, a line that could map a grain's journey from field to granary, or that could recall the prayers and offerings that keep a temple in balance. The potter's wheel leaves a fingerprint that will endure in a vessel used to pour oil on a sacrificial flame or to hold drinking water for travelers. The craftsman's hand, the scribe's mind, the temple's calendar, all are threads in the same fabric, interwoven with the Nile's water and the people's daily needs. And so, with these familiar scenes, we finish. The Nile's daily life is not a dramatic epic, but a patient, sturdy story, one that teaches that civilization survives through reliable routines, careful record keeping, and a respect for the value of small acts done well. The ordinary, in this sense, is a steady form of courage. The choice to begin the day with bread baked in a clay oven and to end it with a ledger balanced, a loom quiet, a pot dried, and a river that continues to give. The memory of such endurance travels forward in the minds of the people who learned to live with the Nile. Artisans who shaped pots and cloth, scribes who counted stock and time, priests who kept track of offerings, farmers who rid the lands, signals, and families who passed these lessons on to the next generation. So we close this chapter with a final thought. What practices and norms from daily life along the Nile echo across later epochs? How might later rulers and builders have taken those habits of measurement, distribution, and ritual care into new scales of urban administration, engineering, and education? The Nile's ordinary life invites us to consider how long a civilization can endure when it measures, distributes, and remembers in a language of routine. In that quiet, a lasting memory can be found, the memory of a people who found stability in simple, repeatable acts, who treated their tools with care, and who, through the slow, patient labor of daily life, believed they could shape the future with the slow, certain patience of the everyday. Dawn crept over the mud brick walls and reed roofs of a Mesopotamian city, not with a trumpet blast, but with a soft, pale light that seeped through narrow lanes and into dusty courtyards. The river's edge, where boats bobbed gently, and a line of priests and traders moved with measured pace, is where the day begins. But in the heart of the city, where the walls rise a little higher and the air holds a steady ache of dry heat and distant oxen, the real day begins with lists. A scribe lays down his reed pen with the ease of long practice, and the town so often imagined as a stage for kings and gods settles into a rhythm of counting, weighing, and recording. The ordinary life of a Mesopotamian city is not built from dramatic moments alone. It is built from the patient, careful administration of grain, labor, temple offerings, and public works. It is a life measured in cubits, shekels, and clay tablets, in rope marks on a canal's edge, and in the precise stacking of storage. Jars that must hold back the wind when the flood recedes to understand the daily life of a Mesopotamian city is to begin with the temple and the palace, and then to move outward to the houses, markets, and fields that rely upon those larger institutions. The city's great temple complex, standing as both sacred center and administrative hub, is a quiet engine of order. Its courtyards, storehouses, and scribal rooms are filled with people who do the kinds of work that do not shout for attention, but keep a city recognizable as a functioning whole. Clerks who tally offerings, overseers who assign tasks to workers, and scribes who write the day's orders with careful strokes of a reed pen. The temple is more than a place of prayer. It is a warehouse, a post office, and a bank rolled into one. It inventories grain and oil as if the gods themselves were counting on it, and in turn, it distributes rations, tools, and linen to workers, priests, and temple households. The quiet authority of the temple rests on a ledger, and a ledger rests on the memory of many hands who have learned to see value where others see only noise. The weight of a jar, the length of a reed, the number of days a laborer must toil on a public project. The city's administrative life extends beyond temple walls into the governor's offices, scribal houses, and market dwellings. An ensi or governor sits at a desk that is more desk than throne, surrounded by scribes, overseers, and stewards who whisper in careful arithmetic and carry out orders with procedural calm. The day's work flows from a long chain, a river toll recorded at the canal gate, a labor roster drawn up for a public building, a shipment of barley delivered to a granary, a tax assessed and stamped on a tally check. In this world, a single piece of clay can carry the weight of a city's expectations. A tablet, baked dry in a sun-bright yard or fresh from a scribe's flat clay, will tell a story of grain counted, a debt owed, a seed allocated, or a caravan issued a permit to pass through a city gate. To watch a Mesopotamian city at dawn is to listen for the small sounds that mark order. The thud of a clay tablet set down, the whisper of a reed stylus scraping across a surface, the soft rustle of a papyrus-like parchment if one has traveled far enough to see a later adoption of writing on more fragile material. The scribes sit in sunlit rooms layered with tablets. Their desks are low, their chairs simple, their minds full of the lexicon of administrative forms, lists, inventories, measures, and contracts. The word for account in many dialects might be the same syllable heard over and over in a dozen offices. The length of a city street. The scribes learn the signs for barley, oil, wool, and copper, the ways to signify weight, volume, and value, and the penalties for miscounting a quarter of a shekel or misplacing a seal impression. The education is not a memory of heroic deeds, but a training in accuracy, routine, and the habit of double-checking one's work before a seal is pressed and a number is set in stone. The daily routine of a Mesopotamian city is a long, careful inventory of what a city can do with the resources it has. Grain moves from field to granary under the watch of inspectors who count sacks as if counting the days of the year. Flax is wove into cloth that will clothe the temple staff, the soldiers, and the market sellers who barter with neighbors near and far. Oil, beer, and salt, each item enters a ledger as a line with a purpose, and each line points toward a need that the city must meet. The maintenance of irrigation canals, the provisioning of workers on a public building, the ritual feast for a procession that honors the gods and the city's memory of their protection. The weights and measures are not just numbers. They are an infrastructure for trust. A farmer who brings grain to a granary knows his harvest will find its way into a stable supply for a family and a temple. A merchant who pays a tax with copper ingots knows the city will be able to maintain its walls, its roads, and its ships. The system is a quiet circle of exchange and obligation, moving with the river's patience and the sun's steady climb. And there are the sealers and the seal impressions, the tiny, almost invisible marks that prove a page's authority. A clay seal pressed into soft clay captures a face of a god, a name, or a title. It is a boundary marker in a world of many hands. A seal says, "This is mine, this has been checked, this has been approved." The seal is the guarantee that a transaction, a loan, or a shipment has passed through the right hands and remains trustworthy even when the bodies of the city's officials have moved on. The routine of stamping and signing, an almost ceremonial, patient act binds the human world to the divine order the city imagines for itself. It is easy to overlook how much trust is built into a simple stamp, but it is precisely these small acts, repeated day after day, that keep a city from dissolving into confusion when trouble comes. Public works provide another axis of daily life that often goes unseen by those who do not stand at the canal's edge or inside the granary's long walls. Canal maintenance, dike repairs, and the planning of irrigation networks require a steady cadence of labor assignments, material allocations, and inspections. The city plans how much brick and mud will be needed to shore up a riverbank, how many workers to hire for a bridge's reconstruction, how to ration reed mats that will cover a canal's open edges to keep water from evaporating in the noon heat. The routine is not glamorous, but it holds a city together against heat, flood, and neglect. The engineers and overseers who supervise these tasks know the signs of a good season and a lean one, the weight of a bucket of grain, the look of a canal's water level, the sound of a reed mat that has seen many storms. Their work teaches. That time is managed as a project step by step, season by season, with the river's memory as a constant companion. In the end, the Mesopotamian city reveals its boring, essential truth. Civilization persists because people remember to count, to record, to plan for contingencies, and to hand down the quiet methods that keep essential functions intact. The excitement of a king's conquest or a grand temple reveal is absent here, replaced by the patient maintenance of a society's nervous system. And yet the memory these routines create is as enduring as stone. The city's stories survive, not in heroic tales alone, but in the everyday acts that keep the gates open, the granaries full, and the temple offerings steady. The ordinary life of a Mesopotamian city: scribes bending over clay, labor rosters being posted, seals pressed on fresh clay, canal engineers calculating water flow forms, a different kind of legacy. A legacy of order, reliability, and the oath Quiet confidence that a city can endure the long, slow work of governance. Dawn crept over the mud brick walls and reed roofs of a Mesopotamian city, not with a trumpet blast, but with a soft, pale light that seeped through narrow lanes and into dusty courtyards. The river's edge, where boats bobbed gently and a line of priests and traders moved with measured pace, is where the day begins. But in the heart of the city, where the walls rise a little higher and the air holds a steady ache of dry heat and distant oxen, the real day begins with lists. A scribe lays down his reed pen with the ease of long practice, and the town so often imagined as a stage for kings and gods settles into a rhythm of counting, weighing, and recording. The ordinary life of a Mesopotamian city is not built from dramatic moments alone. It is built from the patient, careful administration of grain, labor, temple offerings, and public works. It is a life measured in cubits, shekels, and clay tablets, in rope marks on a canal's edge, and in the precise stacking of storage jars that must hold back the wind when the flood recedes. To understand the daily life of a Mesopotamian city is to begin with the temple and the palace, and then to move outward to the houses, markets, and fields that rely upon those larger institutions. The city's great temple complex, standing as both sacred center and administrative hub, is a quiet engine of order. Its courtyards, storehouses, and scribal rooms are filled with people who do the kinds of work that do not shout for attention, but keep a city recognizable as a functioning whole. Clerks who tally offerings, overseers who assign tasks to workers, and scribes who write the day's orders with careful strokes of a reed pen. The temple is more than a place of prayer. It is a warehouse, a post office, and a bank rolled into one. It inventories grain and oil as if the gods themselves were counting on it, and in turn, it distributes rations, tools, and linen to workers, priests, and temple households. The quiet authority of the temple rests on a ledger, and the ledger rests on the memory of many hands who have learned to see value where others see only noise. The weight of a jar, the length of a reed, the number of days a laborer must toil on a public project. The city's administrative life extends beyond temple walls into the governor's offices, scribal houses, and market dwellings. An ensi or governor sits at a desk that is more desk than throne, surrounded by scribes, overseers, and stewards who whisper in careful arithmetic and carry out orders with procedural calm. The day's work flows from a long chain. A river toll recorded at the canal gate, a labor roster drawn up for a public building, a shipment of barley delivered to a granary, a tax assessed and stamped on a tally check. In this world, a single piece of clay can carry the weight of a city's expectations. A tablet, baked dry in a sun-bright yard or fresh from a scribe's flat clay, will tell a story of grain counted, a debt owed, a seed allocated, or a caravan issued a permit to pass through a city gate. To watch a Mesopotamian city at dawn is to listen for the small sounds that mark order. The thud of a clay tablet set down, the whisper of a reed stylus scraping across a surface, the soft rustle of a papyrus-like parchment, if one has traveled far enough to see a later adoption of writing on more fragile material. As scribes sit in sunlit rooms layered with tablets. Their desks are low, their chairs simple, their minds full of the lexicon of administrative forms, lists, inventories, measures, and contracts. The word for account in many dialects might be the same syllable heard over and over in a dozen offices. The length of a city street, The scribes learned the signs for barley, oil, wool, and copper, the ways to signify weight, volume, and value, and the penalties for miscounting a quarter of a shekel or misplacing a seal impression. The education is not a memory of heroic deeds, but a training in accuracy, routine, and the habit of double-checking one's work before a seal is pressed and a number is set in stone. The daily routine of a Mesopotamian city is a long, careful inventory of what a city can do with the resources it has. Grain moves from field to granary under the watch of inspectors, who count sacks as if counting the days of the year. Flax is wove into cloth that will clothe the temple staff, the soldiers, and the market sellers who barter with neighbors near and far. Oil, beer, and salt, each item enters a ledger as a line with a purpose, and each line points toward a need that the city must meet: the maintenance of irrigation canals, the provisioning of workers on a public building, the ritual feast for a procession that honors the gods and the city's memory of their protection. The weights and measures are not just numbers. They are an infrastructure for trust. A farmer who brings grain to a granary knows his harvest will find its way into a stable supply for a family and a temple. A merchant who pays a tax with copper ingots knows the city will be able to maintain its walls, its roads, and its ships. The system is a quiet circle of exchange and obligation, moving with the river's patience and the sun's steady climb. And there are the sealers and the seal impressions, the tiny, almost invisible marks that prove a page's authority. A clay seal pressed into soft clay captures a face of a god, a name, or a title. It is a boundary marker in a world of many hands. A seal says, "This is mine, this has been checked, this has been approved." The seal is the guarantee that a transaction, a loan, or a shipment has passed through the right hands and remains trustworthy even when the bodies of the city's officials have moved on. The routine of stamping and signing, an almost ceremonial, patient act binds the human world to the divine order the city imagines for itself. It is easy to overlook how much trust is built into a simple stamp, but it is precisely these small acts, repeated day after day, that keep a city from dissolving into confusion when trouble comes. Public works provide another axis of daily life that often goes unseen by those who do not stand at the canal's edge or inside the granary's long walls. Canal maintenance, dike repairs, and the planning of irrigation networks require a steady cadence of labor assignments, material allocations, and inspections. The city plans how much brick and mud will be needed to shore up a riverbank, how many workers to hire for a bridge's reconstruction, how to ration reed mats that will cover a canal's open edges to keep water from evaporating in the noon heat. The routine is not glamorous, but it holds a city together against heat, flood, and neglect. The engineers and overseers who supervise these tasks know the signs of a good season and a lean one: the weight of a bucket of grain, the look of a canal's water level, the sound of a reed mat that has seen many storms. Their work teaches. That time is managed as a project step by step, season by season, with the river's memory as a constant companion dot in the end. A Mesopotamian city reveals its boring, essential truth. Civilization persists because people remember to count, to record, to plan for contingencies, and to hand down the quiet methods that keep essential functions intact. The excitement of a king's conquest or a grand temple reveal is absent here, replaced by the patient maintenance of a society's nervous system. And yet the memory these routines create is as enduring as stone. The city's stories survive, not in heroic tales alone, but in the everyday acts that keep the gates open, the granaries full, and the temple offerings steady. The ordinary life of a Mesopotamian city scribes bending over clay, labor rosters being posted, seals pressed on fresh clay. Canal engineers calculating water flow forms a different kind of legacy, a legacy of order, reliability, and the quiet confidence that a city can endure the long, slow work of governance. The city moves toward the depth of afternoon, when the sun climbs high enough to lift the dust from the streets, but not so high that it erases the marks of a day's careful labor. In the heart of the temple complex, the granaries stand as quiet towers of order. They smell faintly of dried barley and oil, a dry sweetness that belongs to storage and memory. A group of scribes sits at low desks, their work lit by the pale glow of oil lamps set along the walls. The reed pen's thin, precise scratch across damp clay tablet surfaces in a rhythm that seems almost ceremonial, as if the marks themselves carry a liturgical gravity. The clay tablets, once fresh and soft, dry to a stiff, sun-baked memory of what has passed through the day, the weight of sacks counted, the seal impressions pressed to confirm a transfer, the balance of grain between granary compartments, this careful noting of shortages and surpluses, the predictable turn of a city's appetite from noon to evening. The scribe's task is not mere copying. It is listening. He or she listens for the tiny discrepancies that can lead to a larger misalignment tomorrow, the mismatch between a shipment's weight and its description, the way a seal's impression sometimes smudges and must be repressed, the tiny slip. In a list that could cascade into a shortage of bread for a festival or a delay in a public work. The education that makes this listening possible is not dramatic. It begins in childhood with the Ediba, the school where a student is introduced to the signs of cuneiform, to the rules of arithmetic that govern a ledger, and to the discipline of double-checking one's own work. The student learns to read, not only the numbers, but the intention behind them. The city's memory stored in the compact, durable form of clay tablets. The tablets carry the authority of authority itself. The temples, the governors, the cities, and in their orderly lines, you sense a city that believes stability can be achieved through attention to small, repeatable steps. Nearby, the market unfolds in a different, but related tempo. The market stalls are wooden frameworks layered with cloth and clay jars, their contents revealing a spectrum of the city's daily needs. Barley and emmer flour, sesame oil, dates, dried fish, wool, flax, copper ingots, and sometimes precious stones traded from distant lands. A merchant weighs out sacks of grain on a simple balance scale. The two pans swing with quiet arithmetic. A little more here, a little less there, until the weight aligns with the designated measure. The balance is held in a pair of hands that know both the feel of clay and the weight of silver. The stable exchange of goods rests on the trust that the scale will not cheat and that the weights will not mislead. The shopkeepers greet customers with a measured politeness, no grand gestures, only a steady, predictable exchange that makes possible a shared sense of time. In this city, the granaries and the market do not stand apart from the temple and the palace. They are interwoven parts of a single, quiet machine. The temple's storehouses house not only grain, but also oil, linen, and ritual offerings, things that must be counted, allocated, and distributed with fair care. The palace or ensi's office, farther down the road, sits at a desk that in practice, a workbench of policy. Here the governor's officials review the day's ledger lines, issue directives for upcoming public works, and sign off on the yashi, allocation of labor and materials. A line of clay tablets passes between hands like a relay, each tablet a relay baton that carries a decision from the governor's desk to the canal gate, from the granary storehouse to the construction crew. The language is not that of poetry, but of procedure. Seals pressed into clay, lists drawn with mathematical care, orders that specify the number of workers to assign to a dam or a road repair, and the times when the workers must begin and end. Their shifts to fit the sun's arc and the city's needs. The canal network that threads through. Mesopotamian life is not a gleaming system of modern infrastructure. It is a web of dikes, gates, and ditches that must be read and reread with every season. Public works rosters lay out the plans for maintenance. Who will repair a sunken section of a canal where reed mats must be laid to slow evaporation? How? Much brick and mud will be needed to shore up a riverbank against the spring flood. The overseers keep a quiet ledger of labor: who shows up, who does not, who needs a reminder, who has earned a reprieve for good performance. The workers are not nameless throngs. They are families and neighborhoods, each with its own daily pattern that harmonizes with the city's industrial tempo. A foreman moves among his crew with a practical familiarity, checking the alignment of a trench, noting the rate at which a dam is being repaired, making a mental map of where the next patch of earth will be needed. The work is dusty, sometimes boring in the way that repetitive tasks can be, yet it is essential. Without the careful draining and redirecting of water, fields would fail, and the city's people would starve in the midst of this quiet administration. The temple reappears not as a distant symbol of cosmic order, but as a practical engine of daily life. The priests and temple staff measure out oil and beer for offerings, prepare cloth for ritual attire, and ensure that each household receives its due portion of bread, oil, and salt as the calendar turns festival to festival. The calendar itself is a machine of time, guiding every action with an eye toward the month's cycles and the gods' expectations. The temple's ritual life feasts, processions, and the annual renewal of offerings requires a steady supply. Chain, grain for the priestly kitchens, oil for lamps, linen for garments, and the fragrances and resins that keep the smoke scent in balance with the sacred. The priests do not merely chant hymns. They coordinate a logistics network that underpins the city's rites, ensuring that ceremonies proceed with the same calm reliability that governs the granaries and the canal gates. The seal, again, appears as the guarantor of trust. A tablet. Bearing a seal marks a decision that is recognized and accepted, a field of responsibility that is shared among many hands and many instruments. To watch this Mesopotamian city by mid-afternoon is to notice a quiet, almost invisible choreography of authority and routine. The governor's house is not a throne room alone, but a hub where plans are translated into actions, where a budget becomes a job roster, where a festival's expenses are traced to their sources, and then reabsorbed into the city's lifeblood. The scribes and overseers do not stand apart from the craftspeople and farmers. They inhabit the same world of careful attention. A craftsman who shapes copper into fittings for doors and chests knows that his work will be measured, weighed, and counted just as surely as the grain in the granary. A farmer who brings barley to the granary expects his harvest to be counted, to be stored correctly, and to be available when the city, temple, and households require it for bread and ritual. The city's trust rests on a dense network of such small, repeatable acts. The ritual of double-checking the weight of a load, the moment when a scribe affixes a seal to confirm a transfer, the quiet discipline of an overseer who does not boast, but simply ensures that a project stays on track. And yet, even in this quiet, there is room for the unexpected. A sudden flood of news from a distant market, a new clay tablet bearing a seal impression that confirms a previously uncertain transfer, a torrid afternoon that slows the pace and prompts a different rhythm for the day's tasks. The city's people learn to respond with patience and with a measured flexibility. They understand that the river's memory, its rhythm of flood and recession, must be matched by a memory of accounts, a discipline of distribution, and a readiness to adjust plans in light of new information. The ordinary life of a Mesopotamian city emerges as a continuous negotiation between temple and palace, between field and granary, between the river's uncoiling water and the city's careful, collated numbers. The afternoon wears on, and the city's quiet machinery hums along. The seal's imprint cools on a new tablet. The market announces the day's last wave of purchases and the first whispers of tomorrow's trade. A cargo vessel pulls into a canal bend, its hold ready for its cargo's next journey. The labor rosters are posted for tomorrow's tasks. The canal gates are prepared for the night, and the scribes prepare to close their day by revising the ledger's pages to reflect what has passed and what will come. In the space between the numbers and the whispered prayers, a city's heart persists. A heart that beats not in dramatic drums, but in the steady tick of attention, the careful rounding of figures, the patient repair of a public work, and the quiet shaping of a society that believes in the reliability of routine. As the sun slides toward the horizon and the canals reflect the last pale glow, the Mesopotamian city settles into its evening routine. The temple lights burn low, their oil lamps throwing a soft amber halo over walls lined with clay tablets. The scribes gather their materials: reed pens, small brushes, pallets of ink made from soot and gum, and piles of damp clay tablets waiting to be baked or dried. They review the day's pages, their eyes moving across lists of grain tallies, labor rosters, and ritual offerings. The seal impressions pressed into clay catch the light in a way that makes them feel as if they hold. Heartbeat of the city, a mark that says, "This is approved. This is true. This remains." The day's work may be finished, but the memory of it lingers in the neat stacks of tablets, in the careful counting of barley, and in the quiet assurance that the city will endure because it has kept its accounts in order. The temple's calendar continues to guide life, its pages turning with the winds of the months and the gods' moods. The granaries close their doors, but not their sense of obligation. The barley stored in neat rows will be retrieved as needed, its weight checked against the ledger's promise. The engineers and canal overseers walk the canal banks at dusk, noting the water's edge, the silts rise, the angle of a newly repaired dike. The markets quieten, but in the market's quiet, there is a ready memory. The weights and measures that held steady through the day, the clatter of a merchant's balance during a last sale, the exchange of a few coins that remains in the coin purse and in the temple's accounts for the next morning's needs. In these quiet hours, the city's archive grows not only in clay tablets, but in the practice of the people who keep it. A family counts its bread rations and knows what is owed. For the temple's offerings, A craftsman signs his pay with a seal impression to confirm his contribution to a public project that will outlive him. A scribe revises his ledger to reflect the day's entries, recalibrates the city's memory, and locks the file away in a brick-guarded box to await the next day's page. The city has a memory that is both shared and personal, a mosaic of households and offices, temples and markets, all contributing to a steady, stable picture of life. The memory is not only in the clay, it is in the know-how that travels from scribal school to village apprentice, how to read a table, how to weigh a sack, how to seal with care, how to keep track of a canal's maintenance, how to plan for a drought, how to interpret a taxes sign. And so, with the sun's final light fading, we leave behind the Mesopotamian city and its quiet accumulation of order. The stories you have heard are not dramatic legends. They are quiet, enduring patterns that show how a civilization can hold itself together through meticulous administration and steady routines. The value of such work is not in a single great act, but in the continuity it provides, the elimination of chaos through measurement, the trust built into a seal, the shared sense of time that links fields, granaries, temples, and markets.